My name's Samuel. Lenny Samuel. You can call me Len. I'm a private eye. A private eye is a private detective. A detective who will work for anyone who will pay him. I'm not a policeman. I work on my own as a private eye. My office is on the west side of Los Angeles, on the 4th floor of a high building. There are only 2 rooms in my office, the outer room and the inner room. The outer room is the waiting room. There are 4 chairs in the waiting room, although there are never 4 people waiting to see me. In fact, there is usually no one at all waiting to see me. In the inner room, there's a cheap wooden desk. There's a big wooden chair for me to sit on, and on the opposite side of the desk, there's a low metal chair for my visitors. The rest of the furniture in my office consists of a large, empty metal cupboard and a low bed in one corner. When there is a lot of work, I sometimes sleep in the office. The notice outside my door says, L. Samuel, Private Detective. That's me. I'm quite tall, nearly 2 meters, and I weigh 80 kilos. A lot of men say that I'm ugly, but women seem to find me attractive. I've got brown eyes, brown hair, and very nice teeth. I had a good nose, too, until someone broke it in a fight last year. Recently, I haven't been very busy. In fact, I've had very little to do. However, I did have some work last month. It all started late one afternoon when I was sitting in my office. I had just finished cutting my nails, and I was about to clean them. Suddenly, I heard someone walk into the outer room. I always leave the door of the outer room open in case anyone wants to come in and see me. When I heard the footsteps in the outer room, I wasn't very surprised. I thought that someone had made a mistake and come into the wrong office. It was probably someone looking for the doctor next door. But a moment later, there was a very quiet knock on the door of the inner room. "Come in," I shouted, and put away the scissors I had been cutting my nails with. The door opened, and in walked one of the most beautiful women I had ever seen. She was about 18 years old, with blue eyes and long blonde hair. She was wearing a smart green coat and had a big brown handbag over her shoulder.
"Excuse me," said the girl. "I'm looking for Mr. Samuel."
"I'm Samuel," I said with a quick smile. "Come in and sit down." The girl didn't smile back at me.
"No, I won't sit down," she said.
"Well, if you won't sit down, at least come in and close the door," I replied. The girl came in, walked over, and put her handbag on my desk. "Now," I said, "what can I do for you?"
"I need help," said the girl slowly, "but I don't know if you will be able to help me. Are you a real private detective?"
"Of course I am," I replied angrily. "Didn't you see the notice on the office door? It says L. Samuel, Private Detective. I'm Samuel. I'm a private eye."
"All right, Mr. Samuel," the girl said coldly. "There's no need to get angry. I have a little job for you."
"Right," I said quickly. "What do you want me to do?"
"It's very simple, really," the girl replied. "I want you to find my sister. She has disappeared."
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
"I see," I said. "Your sister has disappeared. Have you reported her disappearance to the police?" The blonde girl shook her head. She looked very nervous and was starting to cry.
"No, I haven't told the police," she said. "I don't want any trouble with the police. I just want you to help find my sister."
She took a small pink handkerchief out of her handbag and dried her eyes. "All right," I said. "Tell me all about your sister."
"Her name is Elaine Garfield," said the girl.
"And what's your name?" I interrupted.
Helen Garfield," she replied. "My sister disappeared a week ago. We had arranged to have dinner together last Monday night, but she didn't come."
"Perhaps your sister didn't come because she doesn't like the food you cook," I suggested.
"Don't try to be funny. I flew all the way from New York to see her last Monday," she said angrily.
"Oh, so you don't live in Los Angeles, then?" I said.
"No," she replied quickly. "I live in New York. I flew right across America to see my sister, but when I got here, I discovered that she had disappeared."
"How do you know she has disappeared?" I asked. "Perhaps your sister just forgot about the dinner." The blonde girl took a deep breath.
"Look," she said, "let me finish my story. If you don't stop asking questions, I'll find myself another detective.
Right, I said. I'm listening.
I waited for my sister last Monday evening in my hotel,
said the girl.
but she didn't come. I telephoned her, but there was no answer, so the next morning I went to the office where she worked. At her office, they said that she had been to work the day before, on the Monday. They also told me that she'd left suddenly, in the middle of the afternoon, without telling anyone. After that, I went round to her flat, but there was no one there.
The girl stopped for a minute, and then continued.
Mr. Samuel, she said, I'm very worried about my sister. It's not usual for her to disappear suddenly like this. I'm sure that she's in danger, and I want you to find her.
All right, I said. It may be easy or it may be difficult, but I'll find her. But first, tell me why you've waited 3 days before coming to me.
That's none of your business,
the girl said. Okay, I replied. Your sister's name is Elaine Garfield. What does she look like?
Oh, that's easy,
Helen Garfield replied.
She looks like me. We're twins. Now, Mr. Samuel, how much money do you charge?
$50 a day, I said.
Very well, Mr. Samuel, said the girl, but $50 a day is a lot of money. I hope that you will work hard for it.
Oh, yes, I replied with a smile. I'll work very hard. Now give me the address of your sister's flat and the name of the office where she works. I'll start work at once. The blonde girl wrote the addresses on a piece of paper and gave me the paper. One more thing, I said. Can you give me your address, too?
That won't be necessary,
she replied as she picked up her handbag.
I'll come and see you again tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock. Goodbye, Mr. Samuel.
Without waiting for an answer, the girl turned around and walked out of the office. As I watched her walk out of my office, I smiled to myself. This is better than cleaning my nails, I thought. Then I began my work.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
After the blonde girl had left my office, I looked at the 2 addresses which she had written on the piece of paper. The first was Elaine Garfield, apartment 716, Manson Building, Sunset Place. The second address was Meyer and Meyer, attorneys, Title Insurance Building. Putting the paper in my pocket, I got up and walked towards the door. Then I stopped and went back to my desk. I opened the top left-hand drawer and took out my gun, a .38 Smith & Wesson. Then I put the gun back in the drawer. I decided that it was safer to leave it behind. It's easy to get shot if you're carrying a gun. I ran down the stairs, all 4 floors, and out into the street. My old gray Chrysler was outside, so I jumped in and drove off fast, towards Sunset Place. The Manson Building was a tall, ugly block of apartments. I parked the Chrysler outside and walked towards the big glass front doors. "Hey, mister," a voice said. I continued walking. "Hey, mister," said the voice again. "You can't leave your car there." I stopped and turned around. A man in a gray uniform was standing by the Chrysler. "Hey, mister," the man repeated. "You can't park your car here." "Why not?" I asked. "Because only people who live in the Manson Building can park here," he replied. "So," I said, "how do you know that I don't live in the Manson Building?" "Because I'm the porter," the man replied. "I work in the entrance of the building and let people in and out of the door. I know everybody here." "Right," I said. "Then please let me in." The porter and I walked up to the big glass front doors, and he let me in. "Who do you want to see?" the porter asked. "Miss Elaine Garfield," I said. "She lives in apartment 716. "I'm sorry," the porter replied. "Miss Garfield is out." "When did she go out?" I asked, trying not to look interested. "Mind your own business," said the porter. "I'm not going to tell you, and I'm not going to let you go up to Miss Garfield's apartment when she's not there." "Why don't you go for a walk?" I said to the porter, and put $5 in his hand. I gave the porter the money to make him go away. The porter shook his head. "No," he said. I gave the porter $5 more. "Now go for a long walk," I said. The porter went out into the street, and I went up to apartment 716, Miss Elaine Garfield's apartment.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
I rang the bell beside the door of apartment 716 and waited. There was no answer. I rang again, but there was still no answer. Then I took a small, square piece of plastic out of my pocket. I looked around. I was alone. I pushed the piece of plastic into the space between the door and the door frame and moved the plastic up and down. In a minute the door opened, and I went into the flat. I stood still and listened. There was silence. I switched on the light and looked around. It was a modern apartment. I was standing in the living room. Through an open door on my left, I could see the bedroom, which was very neat and tidy. I looked in the wardrobe. It was almost empty. That's funny, I thought. People who disappear don't usually take most of their clothes with them. They only take their clothes if they've been planning their disappearance for a long time. I walked back into the living room and searched it carefully, but I found nothing to explain Elaine Garfield's disappearance. Then I went into the kitchen. The kitchen was also very clean and tidy. There were no dirty plates or cups. There was no old milk in the refrigerator. Everything was in its place. Well, I thought, there's only the bathroom left to search now. The bathroom, too, was empty and clean. I walked quickly around the flat, making sure that I hadn't forgotten anything. I wiped everything I had touched with my handkerchief because I didn't want to leave any fingerprints. Then I switched off the lights and opened the door to leave. But I didn't leave. There were two men standing outside the door. One of them was short and had red hair and a nasty smile. The other was quite tall and was wearing a hat pulled down over his face. The one with the hat was holding a gun, and the gun was pointing at me. I tried to close the door, but the red-haired man put his foot out to stop the door closing. I let go of the door. The door opened, and both the men came in. The one with the hat was in front, and he was still carrying the gun. "Hold your hands up in the air," said the man with the gun. Then he turned to the red-haired man. "See if he's got a gun on him, Joe." Joe, the red-haired man, came over towards me. I waited. When Joe was between me and the man with the gun, I jumped. I jumped forward and caught Joe around the neck. I held him in front of me. The man with the gun couldn't shoot because he would hit his friend. "Right," I said to the man with the gun. "Get out of the way. I'm leaving now, and I'm taking your friend with me." Holding Joe in front of me, I walked slowly towards the man with the gun. Then something went wrong with my plan. The man with the gun started to laugh. He put the gun back in his pocket and stood laughing. "Why are you laughing?" I asked. "I'm laughing because you're so stupid," the man with the gun said, and walked up to me. "Stop," I said, "or else I'll—" "What will you do?" asked the man with the gun. "You can't do anything. I'm the one with the gun." As he said this, the man leant forward. He pulled Joe out of my hands and hit me in the face. I must say that I wasn't expecting to be hit in the face. It hurt. It hurt even more when he hit me again, and I fell on the floor. I lay still on the floor, hoping that the two men would go away. But they didn't go away. Instead, they picked me up and hit me hard on the head. Everything went black. I lay on the floor. I was unconscious.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
I woke up with a terrible pain in my head. I was lying on the floor outside the front door of Miss Elaine Garfield's apartment. I looked around. The man with the gun and his red-haired friend had left. I was alone, and I had a terrible headache. I got up slowly and felt my head gently to see if there was any blood. There wasn't any blood, but my head was still very painful. I decided to go back to the office and go to bed. There was no sign of the porter at the entrance to the Manson building. I walked out of the door and across to the old gray Chrysler. I drove slowly back to the office. The telephone was ringing when I arrived at the office. I went in quickly and answered it. "Samuel speaking." "Listen, Samuel," replied a voice. "Forget about Elaine Garfield. We hurt you a little in her apartment. If you don't forget all about Elaine Garfield, we'll hurt you a lot more." "Who are you?" I asked. But there was no answer. The man had put down the telephone. I decided to do what the man had told me. I would forget all about Elaine Garfield for 10 hours. After a good night's sleep, I would look for Elaine Garfield. I would also try to find the man with the gun and his friend Joe. I lay down on the hard, low bed and went straight to sleep. I woke up the next morning at 8 o'clock. I felt my head carefully, but it did not hurt so much now. I left the office and went across the street to the cafe where I usually had breakfast. I drank a glass of orange juice, ate some fresh toast, and drank several cups of coffee. I read the morning newspapers. There was a lot of news, but nothing about Miss Elaine Garfield. I looked at my watch, left the cafe, and walked over to the Chrysler. By 9 o'clock, I was outside the Title Insurance Building. At 3 minutes past 9, I was standing outside the door of Meyer & Meyer, attorneys. At 20 past 9, I was still standing outside the door. Nobody had arrived yet to work. At 9:30, the first secretary arrived, and at 18 minutes to 10, I was sitting in Mr. Meyer's office. "Well, Mr. Meyer," I said, "my name's Samuel, and I'm a private detective." "I'm pleased to meet you," Mr. Meyer said politely. He was about 55 years old, with a gray suit, gray hair, and a gray face. "Does Miss Elaine Garfield work here?" I asked. "Yes, she does," Mr. Meyer said, "but she hasn't been to work since Monday. Why do you want to see Elaine?" "Her sister has asked me to help find her," I replied. "Can you think of anything Elaine said or did which could explain her disappearance?" Mr. Myers scratched his head. "No," he said, "I'm afraid I can't help you." "Who did Elaine work with?" I asked. Mr. Meyer looked at me. "Why do you say, 'Who did Elaine work with?' and not, 'Who does Elaine work with?' Elaine's not dead, is she?" he asked. I looked straight back at Mr. Meyer. "I don't know if Elaine is dead or not," I said. "Would you be very sad if she was dead?" "Yes, of course I would be sad," Mr. Meyer replied angrily. "Are you trying to suggest that I know where Elaine is?" I smiled. "Now, don't get excited, Mr. Meyer," I said. "Can you tell me the name of anyone who works with Elaine? Anyone who shares a desk with her or works in the same room?" "Yes," Mr. Meyer said. "That's easy. Elaine shares a room with Susie Graham." I got up. "Thank you very much, Mr. Meyer," I said. "Where is Susie Graham's office, please?" "It's along the corridor," said Mr. Meyer. "The third door on the left." I thanked Mr. Meyer again and walked to the door. "Oh, Mr. Samuel," Mr. Meyer said, "I'm sorry that I got angry, but you understand that I don't want—" "Yes, I understand," I interrupted. "You don't want dirty private detectives in your nice, clean office." I walked out of Mr. Meyer's office and banged the door behind me. I walked slowly down the corridor and knocked on the third door on the left.
"Come in," said a voice.
So I went into the room. "Are you Susie Graham?" I asked.
"Yes,"
said the girl sitting at the desk.
"I'm Susie."
I smiled at her. Susie was the kind of girl everyone smiled at. She was small and slim and had a pair of beautiful brown eyes.
"What can I do to help you?"
Susie asked. I smiled again. "I'd like to ask you some questions, Miss Graham."
"Don't call me Miss Graham,"
the girl said.
"You can call me Susie."
"Well, Susie," I said, "I would like to ask you some questions about a friend of yours. Her name is Elaine Garfield." Susie stopped smiling.
"Yes, all right," she said, "but I don't want to talk about Elaine here in the office."
"Right," I replied. "I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll go out and find a cafe. I'll buy you a cup of coffee, and you can tell me about Elaine. All right?" Susie cheered up and looked much happier.
"I'd like to have a cup of coffee," she said, "but Mr. Meyer might get angry if I leave the office."
"Don't worry about Mr. Meyer," I said with a big smile. "Mr. Meyer and I are great friends."
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
Susie put on her coat, and we left the office together. We found a little cafe just opposite the Title Insurance Building. In the cafe, I told Susie why I was asking questions about Elaine Garfield. "Elaine's twin sister, Helen, thinks that Elaine has disappeared, and she has asked me to find Elaine," I said. "Helen told me that she came to Meyer & Meyer last Tuesday. She was told that Elaine had left work suddenly last Monday afternoon. Is that right?" Susie nodded.
"At least part of it's right," she said. "Elaine was at work last Monday, and she hurried off in the middle of the afternoon."
Susie stopped for a minute, and then she continued.
"But I don't remember seeing Elaine's sister Helen on Tuesday. In fact, I didn't even know that Elaine had a sister."
"Elaine's sister lives in New York," I explained. "Now, can you remember last Monday afternoon? Did Elaine give any reason for leaving suddenly?"
Oh, yes, Susie said. Elaine said that she wasn't feeling well and was going to lie down.
Did Elaine receive any visitors or phone calls last Monday afternoon? I asked.
No, I don't think so, said Susie. No, wait a minute. I think... Yes, Elaine did receive a phone call just before she left.
I smiled. I don't suppose that by chance you might have heard any of the telephone conversation.
Certainly not, Susie replied. I don't listen to other people's phone calls.
Can you think of any reason why Elaine disappeared? I asked.
No, Susie replied. Elaine was always very friendly with everyone, and she didn't seem to have any troubles.
Did Elaine have any special friends? Any men or women she talked about a lot? I asked.
No, not really, Susie replied. Elaine and I used to be quite friendly, and we went out dancing together a lot, but recently we haven't been out together at all.
I understand, I said, though I really didn't understand anything at all. Can you remember the last time you went out together? Can you remember the place you went to?
Oh, that's easy, Susie said quickly. We went to the Las Cabanas Club. We always went there. It was about a month ago. We had an argument there, and we haven't gone out together since.
What was the argument about? I asked.
It was after midnight, Susie explained, and I wanted to go home, but Elaine said she wanted to stay a bit longer. She said that she had met a wonderful man and didn't want to leave. I said I was going home, and I left Elaine in the club. After that evening, one thing led to another.
What do you mean? I asked. One thing led to another. Susie smiled.
I often spoke to Elaine about the man she had met. Elaine thought he was wonderful. I told her that he was no good at all.
What did Elaine say when you told her that? I asked with interest.
She became very angry, replied Susie. We haven't been out dancing together since then.
I paid for the coffee. You've been very helpful, Susie, I said, and I've only got one more question. Can you remember the name of the man Elaine Garfield met at Las Cabanas?
Benny Greep,
Susie said.
That's his name, Benny Greep.
Thank you very much indeed, Susie, I said with a smile. You've been a great help.
Not at all,
Susie said, and looked at me with her beautiful big brown eyes.
If there's anything else I can do for you, just ask.
I looked straight into her eyes. What are you doing tonight? I asked.
I'll be at home watching television, Susie replied. My boyfriend's a boxer, and he's fighting in a match on television tonight.
Goodbye, Susie, I said, and watched her as she walked back across the street to the title insurance building. Her boyfriend was a boxer. That was just my luck.
The picture sequence from the cinema has finished. You can look at it once more if you want.
I looked at my watch. It was nearly 11 o'clock. I went back into the cafe and asked if I could look at the telephone book. I turned to L and ran my finger down the outside of the page. Soon I found the name I was looking for, Las Cabanas. I looked more closely. The address was Las Cabanas, 232 Golden Drive, telephone 323-0313. I left the cafe and walked over to where I had parked the Chrysler. It wasn't time for lunch yet, so I decided to go and see what Las Cabanas was like. It took me nearly 20 minutes to drive there, and another 10 minutes to find somewhere to park. Have you ever seen a nightclub in the daytime? It's a very depressing sight. At night, the nightclub seems wonderful. However, at 11:45 in the morning, it looks old, empty, and dirty. The man I met at Las Cabanas looked old, empty, and dirty, too. I rang the bell for 5 minutes before he answered the door. Even then, he didn't open the door itself. Instead, he opened a small window in the door.
"What do you want?"
he asked.
"The club doesn't open until 10 o'clock tonight."
"I'm looking for someone," I said. "Someone called Benny Greep."
"I don't know anyone called Benny Greep,"
the man replied, and started to shut the window. "Wait a minute," I said, and pushed $5 through the window.
"That's better,"
the man said, and he opened the door and let me in. I followed him across the dance floor. The man was a cleaner. He picked up a brush and began to clean the floor. "Do you know where I can find Benny Greep?" I asked the man again.
"If you come back tonight at 10 o'clock, you'll find Benny Greep here,"
the man said.
"Benny plays the drums in the band."
I gave the man another $5. "Where can I find Benny now?" I asked. The man picked up a piece of paper from the floor and wrote an address on it. I took the paper and left immediately. As I drove the gray Chrysler away from Las Cabanas, I looked at the address the cleaner had written. 5314 Arvida Street, West Los Angeles. 5314 Arvida Street was an old block of apartments. I gave the porter a couple of dollars, and he told me which was Benny Greep's apartment. I walked up the narrow, dark stairs until I came to the 5th floor. I was looking for apartment 507. I knocked on the door of apartment 507 and waited. There was no answer, so I rang the bell. No answer. I knocked again, hard. There was still no answer. I pushed against the door, and it opened easily. I waited. There was no sound from the apartment, so I went in. The light was on, and the curtains were drawn. The apartment was very small. There was one main room, which was used as the living room, dining room, and bedroom. The room had 2 doors. One of the doors led into the kitchen, and the other into the bathroom. The main room was very untidy. The table was covered with dirty plates and glasses, and there was a full ashtray lying on the floor. There was a strange smell in the room. I looked into the kitchen. The kitchen was also dirty and untidy. I walked across to the bathroom and opened the door. Benny Greep was in the bath.